high level and a sort of a mid what we call humanitarian management level, like at an agency level and at a cluster level, and really wasn't taking into account how perhaps people affected by disasters might feel about how we work. So we decided to have a look at this, how we could better integrate, but as a bottom-up approach. So the first slide is just really showing the current cluster system, just 11 clusters we have, the shelter, wash, and logistics, food security, all the different clusters that we have here. And just to say, my experience was, I've been doing this for a while, the clusters were formed, I felt, always more to organize how we do work and perhaps and how to better organize humanitarian systems based on the need of agencies, perhaps, rather than the actual need of community. So to say that, I would disagree when people would say that the humanitarian system is broken, which is a lot of the sort of conversation going up to the WHS. I would say we're just evolving. We're in a much better place than we used to be. But, I mean, the idea of to stop evolving would not be a good thing. I think the idea is to keep changing to do better. So if we go to the second slide, let me just put mine on the slide. I think you have to kind of click your way through this, John. So the first one, when you click, you get the, like National Disaster Management Authority. This is just looking like how, how it appears on the ground at the moment, the humanitarian system, how it might appears to us in general. Not all emergencies are the same. It changes from, context to context. But in, a typical rapid response, to a natural disaster, we'd often have a setup like this. You have a national level National Disaster Management Authority. Then a provincial level, we have like north, south, east, west. We're just going to look at the west. And then we go down to local levels. We'd have areas like A, B, C. Is that what you're seeing, John? Just want to make sure, because I'm clicking through here.
We can hear.
Yeah, everything is up at once on my slides.
Oh, okay. You put all that second slide up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that's fine. Sorry, I can't see what you're doing. So, so this is kind of okay. Then it's quite confusing, but basically the current situation is you have the national level, you have the government, you'll have the national cluster coordination, and in this example we have education, food security, shelter, and wash, for example, are activated clusters. If you follow the arrow down on the wash, we're only going to look at wash now. Well, we're looking at them all, but if you look at wash, you go down to the hub coordinator teams, which are usually cluster leads in these areas. And then if you go down to local authority level, the different colors, the green and pink and orange and blue, they represent, say, NGOs, for example. They could be national or international NGOs. And you go down so if you go down from C and into C1 and C2 on the right-hand side, C1 and C2 would be local community level, for example. They would be village level or a block level in an urban environment. So you've got sort of local authority level C, and then split up into different villages or whatever local authority, municipality, perhaps local, urban administrative block, say, for example. So what we're trying to show here is, if you were to take village C2, for example, they're receiving water from an agency, a green agency, we call it whichever one, and then they're also receiving shelter from that agency, but they're also receiving food from a different agency, a sort of dark blue agency, and they're also receiving education from a light blue agency. So they're basically receiving, this household or community are receiving different sectoral support from different agencies, and this is regularly what we see on the ground. Similarly for community A1 on the left, it's the same idea. You've got different agencies providing different support to the communities. And this results in multiple conversations taking place, and it's something actually a lot of communities will give out about when we're doing our sort of post-evaluations, and even when you're in the middle of an emergency, you'll have communities saying, well, I just spoke to someone yesterday, I just gave them this information. As you have multiple agencies entering communities and gathering information from the same people, it raises expectations, and it actually can dishearten communities as well, because they're giving lots of information, lots of their time, and often not receiving much back. So this is the kind of system that we see currently happens. Not all. This is probably an exaggerated version, but it's pretty much what we see. The next slide is, and I'm sorry if the slide that we had today, if I could have, they were a little more detailed, but the next slide is just showing this integral human development framework, which is just a basic, like a development framework. It could be the same as the DFID development framework, which is the exact same, more or less. And this is how we tend to think in development projects when we work with communities. We look at households or communities as a single structure towards the left with different assets and capacities. And when they make decisions, they tend to think of all their needs, not just singularly, as we tend to make them think through the cluster system. So the cluster system is very stovepiped, and it tends to make people think, oh, so what's your wash need, or what's your livelihood needs? And whereas we tend to, in development projects at least, tend to treat a household as a sort of a more what do you call it? Well, thinking entity that also has influences and access to systems and structures, and then develops strategies and outcomes. So we were thinking, why don't we think more like this in emergency projects, and treat households as a more I'm trying to think of a good word, a more coherent, or not coherent, but consolidated unit. So then the next slide, it's just simply very similar to the first one, but we're saying that if we were to take the major complaints from households about multiple agencies dealing with them, and we're to say, why can't we have a situation where one agency takes on a more sort of generalist and multi-sectoral role in coordinating assistance to a household? So a household or community would then only be having a singular conversation with an agency. So this example shows the green household on the right communicating with this green agency, and that agency then communicating upwards into a local authority level as well. Similarly, on the left, the same for community A1. The yellow household is communicating with a level a single agency as well. So the idea here is that agencies become a little bit more multi-sectoral, that we don't, and it's just to say, it doesn't feel like this doesn't mean it's for all sectors, because when we look at this, we say that health, for example, and it's not shown here, but it is on our new presentation. Health is a very specialized, and not every agency can take on health. But it's, for example, food security and livelihoods and shelter and wash are often very similar. Protection mainstreaming is cross-cutting. So we also show in this diagram at a provincial level, you have logistics and communication clusters as separate clusters, whereas the other clusters on the left, we would see them more, and except for health, I think we would change health in this, we would see them more as technical support groups. So instead of the clusters, having funding coming down through clusters, the funding would go down through regional or local areas that would be coordinated by agencies, and the needs of each area would be met. Would be based on what is the need in that area, what is the priorities in that area, as opposed to what the cluster set as priorities. On the right side, again, you have the communication towards and coordination towards the local authorities, and this would vary from response to response. In some areas, the local authorities are often very strong, like Nepal, for example. There were, whereas Haiti would be the opposite, where government was very much affected and was not very functional for a number of months. Nepal, the government was very effective. So the relationship might change between agencies and government. It may be more a coordinating role of humanitarian assistance. It may be, you know, and maybe the government having more, maintaining more what there is their current responsibility in virtually providing assistance to communities. And that's kind of like what we're suggesting, sort of structure like this. We'll come back to that in a minute. What I'll do is just the last couple of slides, just some key elements what we talk about this integrated approach. And just say the integrated approach is very good ended up doing in Haiti, what was called a neighborhood approach. After a number of months working, I think a lot of agencies went into a neighborhood approach because of the difficulty in working through sectors in multi-zonal areas. And similar in Nepal, the government actually in Nepal had asked us to work in more zonal type approach and doing multi-sectors because it just made more sense to them. They couldn't see why we needed to be doing multi-sectoral support. So the key elements would be community and households need it's a center-up approach. So bottom or center approach, bottom-up, looking at households. Commit to accompanying communities through emergency response and recovery. This is again this idea that sometimes emergencies come in, drop stuff down the ground and go. We're suggesting here that, you know, there needs to be a connect with all the way. Agencies should come in and do the emergency response and the recovery, and then link to the development as well. Not just, you know, drop it off there, but you know, bring communities through all the way. It's a zonal area operational approach, so it's based on dividing up into geographical areas. Single point of coordination with communities. Single point of coordination with local authorities again. Clusters are twigs for the most part, so they're technical working groups. And it should be flexible and able to adapt to contexts that vary. And the last slide, or there's two more slides. The next slide, NGOs are capable of. So what does it mean for NGOs? We need to be capable of coordinating multi-sectoral programs, be able to form partnerships on the ground for specialized services as needed. Funding would be distributed by zone and not by sector, and flexible to the context. And the last slide just shows, this can be updated now a little bit from the WHS, but this idea to commit to, you know, move beyond. I think this is from the Secretary General, said this in a statement prior to the WHS, which is, you know, commit to following in order to move beyond traditional silos, work across mandates, sectors, and institutional boundaries with greater diversity of partners towards ending need. So the idea. A lot of people have been talking about this idea to replace, you know, this sectoral approach and to be able to work towards boundaries. And the grand bargain that was done, that came, you know, the document that came out from the NGOs and not just the NGOs, it was the major donors as well and agencies, and you know, brings these types of, you know, the needs for. Just looking at it here now, increased use of reduce duplication and management costs, which obviously is number 4 on the grand bargain, and that's something that we think a more integrated approach would do. Improve joint and impartial needs assessment. That's number 5 on the grand bargain. And again, having a singular approach would probably do that as well. And include people receiving aid and making decision-making which affect their lives. That's number 6 on the grand bargain as well. And again, I think a more integrated approach, a more direct line of communication with communities, and also the ability to hold agencies more accountable, so we're not all hiding behind each other, but, you know, single agencies are having to become more accountable to communities, would help meet that particular aspiration in the grand bargain. So that's just really it. Sorry, I kind of rushed through it through the end, but I guess if anyone has any questions, I can hopefully respond.
Yeah, great. So if anybody has questions, just please unmute your mic and speak up.
Yeah, John, this is Mujib. I had one question. I put it on the messenger.
Okay.
On slide 4, when there is a presentation of sectoral technical support group and also different level of government, is there any relation between that certain technical sectoral support will be provided on each level, or that's just because of the space of the slide it's put it there?
It would be different. I think I got a question. I'll just say it would be different at different levels. The technical support would be different. So, like at the national level, you would have, you know, it'd be the wider sort of scope of the response, and whereas the sorry, I got I think I just got my so it was the wider scope of the response, whereas the lower level, working with community level or local authority level, it would be bringing in like best practices and specifications. So, like for example, water and sanitation at that level, it would be okay. Here's an agreement that we would recommend that the response should be, and this would be negotiated or agreed with the local authority at that level as well. Like we agree that the wash response should consist of this, or the shelter response should consist of this package or this type of package. So it would vary at different levels. I would see.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Sorry, just add. I would just say, to add there to that, I would say that we would look to, like certainly at the community level and local authority level, but certainly at the community level, we'd see a role for the clusters to do accountability, to do M&E basically, to go into the communities and say, oh, this agency is meeting their the quality programming, you know, or timely, efficient programming, or not. So I would see a role in technical working groups also in accountability.
Clear. And did you have a chance to discuss this with various people during the humanitarian summit?
No, we before the summit we presented to a number of agencies, a number of different, but no one really took it on yet. Yeah, so it wasn't discussed at the humanitarian summit, but when you look at the grand bargain, the sort of what the agencies said they were, or the various agencies, UN, government donors, or say they want to do, we think this type of, at least the idea of having a better integrated and a bottom-up approach should be considered now going forward. So, I mean, the grand bargain is something what we commit to going forward. So, we're saying, okay, we're committing to including people who are receiving aid in the decision making. Well, our current structure probably isn't the best structure to do that, for example. So going forward, we would like to see maybe more. And what we're really doing at the moment is just throwing this out because there are holes in it. We had a meeting in our own team meeting last week, and we sat and looked at this, and you know, people are saying, well, how does this work? This is going to be very difficult, and you know, people punched holes in it, and you know, my answer to them is always go back to the fact, well, if the only reason we're not going to include people more directly in the response is because it doesn't suit how we operate, then we've kind of missed the point, haven't we? So, yeah. I think we can always how we operate.
If I can jump in, this is Nurhan from Counterpart. Thank you very much, Donal. This is a very interesting presentation addressing an important issue, and I feel like you've done a good job with showing sort of the problems and what needs to be tackled. I'm hearing that forming partnerships on the ground is sort of one of the key things you've identified. You know, forming partnerships, building capacity. Have you thought about, you know, how you would go about doing that if, you know, involving maybe other sectors in the NGO community that specialize in building capacity perhaps? should be a player in this process?
Thanks. No, we really haven't got that far, because thinking about how the nuts and bolts will come together on the ground. Obviously, partnerships on the ground would be important, and it also varies from country to country. I think, like depending on what's the let's say the capacity of the local government on the ground or local NGOs on the ground. Different countries will have different levels of ability to take on different roles at local level. And often then in emergencies, it often depends on how devastating was the emergency. So in Haiti, you have flooding and cyclones, and sometimes they're not too bad, and the National Red Cross can take on the response, and NGOs and local NGOs can do the localized response. But then you get an earthquake, and that's all gone, or more or less gone. At least it's trampled on for the first number of months, and it becomes different sort of environment. The support tends have to rely a lot on external support then. We haven't really thought through on I think it would vary from country to country, and different countries have a larger local NGOs, for example, with greater capacity than other countries.
Yeah. Joan Parker posted a question, also similar question about capacity needs of community level implementing organizations. How large, and is there sufficient capability for mentoring or peer-to-peer training in doing this?
Yeah, that's good. It's very hard to tell. It always goes from context to context, and there's sometimes one of the issues that in our conversation last week about this was people are saying, again, talking about building capacity, and then it's like, well, how do you maintain that capacity? What resources are needed to maintain a capacity, a readiness of a country, for example, to be able to respond? And then again, it's like, well, is that actually even practical at some level? What generally happens, and I just having a conversation with Alberta before the meeting started, when we're trying to connect, and often what happens is we're often replaced, like the humanitarian world, by government. And so if you look at Latin America now, 30 years ago, CRS, and I'm sure CARE and World Vision and all the agencies, we're all quite big down there. We're a lot smaller now, and why? Because local governments are in a much more developed and a much more a stronger position to take on what is effectively their role and responsibility during a crisis. Of course, then you get something like Ecuador earthquake recently, which is just a little bit maybe too much initially for the government, but within a few weeks, a month or two, they're in control and responding reasonably effectively. We could argue that one actually. So I think it's the whole. I'm not sure how to handle it, whether there needs to be a lot more mapping about, well, this country in the next 5 years, for example, the government or 10 years, the government is not going to be able to take on an effective role. Therefore, civil society will. Therefore, it's worth investing in it. And maybe in other countries, it might be, well, maybe we just need to invest at the government level and help them be better able to respond. I think a lot of that's going on in Haiti at the moment, actually, working with local disaster management committees to be better able to respond to the future.
Right.
So I just need to say, I don't think there's one shoe fits all. I think you have to sort of work to the context.
So in terms of engaging kind of the whole machinery of international humanitarian response and advancing this practice, Donal, who would need to get together, and what kind of meetings do you envision we could propose to bring people together to discuss this and to begin discovering in the action, I guess, as you did in Haiti with the neighborhood block-to-block programs, how to make it work? What do you what is your sense of the correct players to get together, and what kind of conversations had to move it forward?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Well, on the back of the grand bargain, then now that's like more or less a document that's been released by government, we're at least able to turn around and say, well, you guys are committing to a better way of working, so and we're helping by looking at a system like this, maybe to tick some of those boxes. Not saying this is it, this is the final solution at all. But what we're saying is we should be starting any conversation, which is what the grand bargain seems to look at. Sometimes it talks a little bit too much maybe about clusters and sectors, and maybe not enough about households and communities. But going forward, at the moment we're doing is just putting it out there to our peer agencies and all, just to see if people are interested in taking it forward, to get their ideas, to say, well, maybe someone sees a better way of doing it, or something, adding something, or a different way. So it's really at the moment just forming a conversation at this point, and then we look for opportunities to present at different venues. Like I think there's a meeting coming up now in London, or on with a number of UN agencies are going to be there. There's cluster meetings as well. We're starting to present it at cluster meetings as well. So it's really just building up a critical mass of peer agencies that say, okay, we really want to explore this a bit further, and so it's a fresh idea. It's kind of we're kind of waiting for the WHS to finish, and then we'll see where we go with it. So no specific plans at the moment, only to present to the peer agencies and find opportunities and where we could present it, and hopefully build a sort of momentum towards people wanting to discuss it and to see if it is actually a practical way of working. Just to say, it is very like the camp management system. Like when you go to camp management at the moment, they tend to work a little bit like a coordinating agency will coordinate the different services. And there's two ways of looking at this. One way is often the services are provided by multiple partners, or even in my own team, my own group, some people think that that's a better way, and others think that maybe it's better if agencies become more multi-sectoral themselves, so that if you were to take water and sanitation, shelter, and say livelihoods, and even food security, you can take those four sectors, that often the type of response we do in these sectors is very similar. And similar in the sense they're very connected. Like shelter without wash doesn't really make sense, and livelihoods is is how people maintain their food security and contribute to building their shelter. So we see a lot of connection, certainly those four shelters. And just to say, the other thing that's changing in the humanitarian world obviously is the use of cash, and the use of what we call multi-purpose cash grants. And that's another reason why people are starting to think more multi-sectoral now, because we're saying, let's give this cash grant to this household to, so they can make decisions, and those decisions will be based around their shelter, livelihood, food security, wash, education, health, and all the rest. So surely and that's another reason for us reorganizing ourselves to better manage that type of multi-sectoral approach as well.
Very good.
So that doesn't quite, just going forward, there's no particular plan. I mean, my purpose for presenting today was really just to share with a wider audience and maybe get some conversations going, so people can maybe start to critique as well and say, this will never work, or have you thought of this idea, or how maybe we could make this better.
And do you really, as we have, because this whole group of people that you're on with today, and a lot of other people that we'll be sharing the recording with, are really both interested from a practice perspective and from an advocacy perspective in basically empowering communities to be more in charge of their own futures. So if we run into people who want to engage, should we just funnel them to you?
Yes, please. Yes. No, if this is something you think within your own organizations and you want to pursue, then please, yeah, just funnel them our way.
Okay. Joan has typed in another question. She writes, how dependent is this approach on technology?
That's a good question, Joe. Actually, I'm actually on. I can actually see the questions now. It's finally downloaded.
Oh.
It doesn't depend on technology, but obviously technology is more and more being used. I think technology may help it happen. The use of like multi-purpose cash grants using singular databases. Like this is something we're trying to do within CRS. Is just have, you know, instead of having multiple tools for registering people, and then another tool for doing the distribution, and then another tool for doing the sort of monitoring and evaluation, having you know, singular tools to be able to, you know, what do you call it, more like multi-purpose platforms would help. But I always think that as well, we have to be very careful that we don't we don't use tools too much or as a way to block or connect with communities. So when I look at this, I'm not really looking at tools. I'm looking at that singular conversation. I'm looking at that line of responsibility to households, saying that, we're taking responsibility and you should hold us accountable. I think the tools are part of the process that might make our work easier and more accountable as well. But there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot happening with tools at the moment and technology. In humanitarian work, it's actually hard to keep up with it.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions or proposals from folks on the line? Well, listen, Donal, thank you so much for dealing with your own humanitarian IT emergency there in Baltimore today. Sorry that made it more difficult for you, but we really appreciated hearing from you. And I realized as you were talking that I haven't read the outcome document myself, so we'll pull that down and learn about these points that you were just pointing to, and we'll do everything we can from this side to foment this conversation and see if we can make this thing happen.
Great, thank you. And again, if people are interested in pushing this forward or pushing within their own communities, then please go ahead and do it. And I think it's like these conversations often start off with just planting the seed, people, adjusting it to what they think might work, and eventually we'll hopefully meet somewhere with a better system.
Great, fabulous. Okay, well, if there's nothing else. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, just thank everyone for taking the time and putting up with our IT issue at the start.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.